welcome to this week's Talking Europe on France 24 with me, Catherine Nicholson. Now, it sounds like an incongruous shopping list and a half. Steel, orange juice, motorbikes, peanut butter and more. The link is they are all items that could be dragged into a transatlantic trade war. It all began a few weeks ago when Donald Trump announced he would hike import tariffs on steel and aluminium. The European Commission said it wouldn't take this lying down and is ready to take the United States to the WTO court. Well, Trade Commissioner Cecilia Malmström also announced a string of American products that Europe is ready to hike tariffs on itself, including such all-American items as OJ peanut butter and Harley-Davidsons. The question then is, where next? Can the march to trade war be stopped? Could Europe be accused of protectionism too? And on some scores, might Donald Trump have a point? Let's find out with our guests today. I'm joined by Philippe Lamberts from Belgium, MEP and co-chair of the Greens Group. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
From Sweden, MEP Christopher Fjellner from the European People's Party Group. Hello there.
Hello.
And we're also joined by an outside expert with some legal and American insights. Natalie McNellis, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
International lawyer, trade lawyer, and now journalist with MLEX Insight. Thank you for being with us. Now, we need to flag up first off that we are recording this programme before these tariffs from the US are meant to come into effect, and it is a very fast-moving situation. So we're going to discuss many things that could be changing in the next days and weeks. First question, though, the impact of this. I'd like to come to you first, Philippe Lamberts. How damaging is what Donald Trump has announced? Some people here in Europe have been saying, look, there can be no winners.
Well, it really depends on whether you look at volumes, because steel and aluminium exports from the European Union to the US are, I would say, marginal in our external trade balance, or if you speak about the legal impact. I mean, we've tried to build over years a multilateral legal order governing trade, and what we see is that the US presidency is currently trying to destroy that order. And that is what worries me most, because indeed you can start a trade war. It's easier to win for those who have a trade deficit than for those who have a trade surplus. And there, frankly speaking, I'm not sure that Europe's macroeconomic strategy, which is basically let everyone do like Germany does, that is build one's economy on massive surpluses, well, that makes your economy dependent on the rest of the world, and so makes you vulnerable to that kind of one-off action. And so we are basically paying the price for this.
Christopher Fjellner, do you agree?
It's a little bit scary for me, but I actually agree with the Greens here.
Voilà.
No, but I think that is partly also common wisdom, of course, that from an economic point of view, I just take the Swedish perspective. We have 50 billion Swedish crowns in exports of steel. 4 or 5 billion of those go to the US. It does matter, clearly, but the risk it poses to the rule-based international trade system is, of course, much, much greater. And the problem with trade war is that these tariffs in themselves might do marginal damage or just some damage. But if we spin into a trade war, there's no winners.
That's a very evocative image. And we have talked a lot, of course, here in Europe about the damage it could do to Europe. Natalie McNellis, though, the last time we had a trade war with the United States, George W. Bush imposing tariffs that it said led to the loss of 200,000 jobs in the United States. So how can this possibly be popular on that side of the Atlantic either?
Well, I think that is, you have to look at this in view of the fact that we have 140,000 jobs which are in the steel industry in the United States and 6.5 million jobs that are in the downstream industries, which depend on having a source of reasonably priced steel. So when you talk about a trade deficit, it's not necessarily a bad thing if you have an opportunity to get the steel that you need to produce more cars, to produce more white goods. So I think that when we hear, especially myself looking at it as a lawyer, I think, what does this mean for companies who have been relying on these laws for legal certainty, and now they're all thrown up in the air by what Trump is proposing?
Well, in terms of laws, the European Commission has said that they're ready to go to the WTO court over this. Just to stay with you, Natalie McNellis. Is the European Union likely to win? Can we make any predictions?
Well, I think that one of the things which is a technicality, which I think is important to think about in this case, is that Trump is basing his measures on national security objections. He's saying that there's a risk to the security of the United States, military security. This is a case which would be hard for the WTO to decide against the United States on, because it's really a point of national sensitivity And I'm not sure that any one of the WTO members would be happy to see the WTO intervene there. So it's dangerous, I would say, because not only might he not lose, he might win, but also other countries might get the same idea. Hey, that sounds like a good way for me to do what I want. I can use national security now. The US has opened the door.
Well, Christopher Fiano, you seem to be agreeing there, but perhaps the EU does have to make this, I mean, it's a point of principle, isn't it?
Yeah, and also, if we are to be loyal to the international trading system and the rule-based trade, I think we have to play by the rules and actually sue them. So even though that poses dangers, as you rightly point out, what if we win? What would Donald Trump do then? I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if he would propose to withdraw the US from the WTO. And that, of course, the consequence of that would be, it would be extremely dangerous. But at the same time, we can't do anything else. Just as a side note, that's interesting. There's hardly any jurisprudence at all in WTO on this case. And the only case I know of when this has been invoked before was actually Sweden in the 70s, saying that we want national security measures to not to stop imports of boots because our army can't walk barefoot into the wars. But that was just, people laughed us out.
And that's
and that's probably what we should do at this as well. Just treat it legally
and then again, I mean, invoking national security when only a marginal part of US steel imports are going into the defense industry is ridiculous, of course.
I believe the Department of Defense said
if the steel comes from military allies of the United States, that is Europe. I mean, how can you invoke that? So, of course, they are just stretching the rules ridiculously. Now, the point is that the US is also blocking the functioning of the WTO because they refuse the appointment of judges at the appellate court, which means that if we start a procedure in the, at the WTO, it can be adjudicated in the first round, but then if we want to go to appeal, well, there won't be any judgment because there's no judges or not enough judges. And that is, again, to me, the behavior of what I consider rogue states. You know, we don't play by the rules. Well, either the rules suit us and we will use them, or they don't, and then we don't play by the rules.
Well, it is the world's biggest economy. The United States has lots of muscle. Some people here in Europe saying, OK, let's retaliate, let's fight fire.
But I felt that the post-war World War II order was not based on muscle, but was built on a legal order that people abide to. And in that sense, it's another example of how the current US administration is destroying the very world order that the Americans led building after World War II, which is a bit scary, to be honest.
And from that perspective, building on that, I think it's important to think of what we would like to avoid. We'd like to avoid a trade war. Therefore, I think we should be very cautious, keep our head calm when it comes to retaliatory measures.
Well, we've already heard from the Commission, though. We've got our lovely pictures of peanut butter, Harley-Davidsons and all sorts of things that the Commission says we're going to hike tariffs on you in response.
Yeah, but there are two reasons to actually at least be careful in that sense. First of all, I have a hard time explaining to my voters why they, when they go to Carrefour, should pay the price for US steel tariffs. That's because it hurts us more than it actually will hurt them. But the second aspect of that is I think we have to remember our history. As you mentioned, we've been here before. 2002, we won that war by taking them to the WTO, but never introduced countermeasures. We didn't do that, and therefore keep our head cool. I'm more worried right now, actually, about the fact that everybody's forced into this negotiation situation with the US, where we're supposed to come there and beg under threats for having these withdrawn. And that the Canadians, Australians, now as we speak, Cecilia Malmström is there doing that, and that is just erodating, it's taking away the rule-based system, that those who actually live up to his rules, not the international rules, they will have less tariffs.
Well, Natalie McNellis, where do you see, if we do go into countermeasures, where do you see that ending up?
Well, I mean, I think that you're right that, in a sense, Europe is trying to behave like the adult in the room. We have this very impulsive U.S. president who, you know, who lives on a tweet cycle, and the rest of the world is having to sort of mollify his a bit outrageous demands.
And he is winning political points from doing these things.
Absolutely,
Because we don't, I mean, if there are jobs that are going to be lost out of this, we won't know that until a couple of years down the line.
Exactly. And so I think one of the difficulties is that we have, like you said, the rest of the trading world has to try to mollify this rogue state that is actually exposing the weaknesses of the WTO system, because in fact, the WTO system depends a lot on the cooperation and the good faith of the members.
Well, I'd like to come to a point that's somewhat related. It's not in this exact news story about this particular trade war. A couple of months ago, the US started attacking Spanish olive exporters on a slightly different point, claiming that the common agricultural policy funding they receive is unfair state aid. Our team has been to Spain earlier this month to find out a bit more.
It's not just Europe's steelmakers who've been fretting over President Trump's trade tariffs lately. They seem to have escaped them for now, but that's not the case for Spanish olive growers who are finding new import duties of 20% hard to swallow. The White House says the move will protect US producers who lobbied hard for action to be taken.
It's not a problem of the Spanish olives. The fact is that Trump believes that the support given to the olive table is dumping European product in the American market at unfair prices. But the support received by the Spanish olive producer is a cap support.
The EU has long said its agricultural policy is in line with global trade rules, while MEPs have called for the tariffs to be challenged at the World Trade Organization.
The position of Spain and the EU must be defended, which means defending the common agricultural policy.
The Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy is hoping Trump will change his mind. Spanish olive growers say the tariffs could cost them up to €700 million over 10 years, according to a European Parliament motion passed earlier this month. So this transatlantic trade row between the US and the EU could leave a particularly bitter taste in their mouths.
Okay, some very strong opinions in Spain about the olive issue and feelings that could jeopardise the entire common agricultural policy. Philippe Lamberts, if I come back to you, I'm wondering if you think that perhaps Donald Trump does have a bit of a point about some of these things. There is this trade imbalance between the US and the EU, the common agricultural policy. There are even voices in the EU that say, is this a fair policy? Does this conform to international trade rules?
Well, quite obviously, the European Union has a surplus with the United States, but there's many reasons to that. I mean, if the United States are artificially boosting internal demand, notably by running huge fiscal deficits, well, no surprise that then that boosts imports to the United States, and that has an impact on global trade. So, I mean, it's not as if, well, the Europeans are just dumping stuff into the US markets. If there's demand or excessive demand in the US markets, well, don't be surprised that the world suppliers are prepared to supply it. So that's a bit the equation that is at stake. Now, it is fact that the tariffs for goods coming to the European Union are slightly higher than the tariffs for the goods arriving to the United States. So, yes, the US administration has a point in saying, well, tariff-wise, Europe is more protectionist, but if you look at public procurement, you have in the US the Buy American Act that basically restricts suppliers who want to supply public administrations in the US. We don't have that in Europe. So again, the picture is not as simple as Donald Trump would like to depict it.
Christopher Fjellner on the same point.
No, but just when we have to at least acknowledge the fact that the difference between the EU and the US is marginal. Where our average tariff is 4.7%, theirs is 3.5%. From an international perspective, we're open economies.
Yes.
Then when you look at the CAP, yes, the CAP is a problem for international trade. It is problematic. With that said, though, we have our current regulations is in the so-called green box in the WTO. They've been deemed to be, not that trade distortive. Therefore, I think it's not reasonable for the US to, and I think they will lose if they try to make an anti-subsidy case on that.
OK, well, unfortunately, we are running out of time for this. Perhaps just like to come to Natalie McNellis for one final prediction, if I might ask you, $64,000 question. Do you believe that this is going to play out through countermeasures or perhaps through negotiation?
In my view, I think that Trump is setting himself up to have a very good negotiating position. So I think that this is a lot of bluster, like many things are with Trump, and it does put him in a better position in the renegotiation of NAFTA, for example.
Well, thank you all very much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for our debate on this topic.
Yeah.
Before we go, though, we do like to keep an eye on fake news here on Talking Europe. This week, we're looking into the reporting on the case of the poisoning of a former Russian spy in the UK.
The United Kingdom points the finger at Moscow in the poisoning case involving a former Russian spy. But conspiracy theories abound on social networks. In Moscow, the dominant theory is that the UK or the US are trying to destabilize Russia before the elections, which Vladimir Putin won by a comfortable majority. A more original theory, seen on Russian television, is that the UK poisoned the former spy to stage a boycott of the coming Football World Cup in Russia. A fear which appears unfounded, since only the royal family have signaled their intention to do that. But the most original theory probably goes to Rossio24, which claims that the former Russian agent was exposed to the product by accident, while the British Secret Services were conducting an experiment on the toxic gas. One of the few certainties in this spy affair is that the gas used in the assassination attempt, called Novichok, was developed originally in Russia during the Cold War, which leaves little doubt about its origin. But don't jump to conclusions, however. The truth probably won't come to light for many years because the information in the hands of the Secret Services are by nature classified. In the meantime, the whole affair seems to have somehow repaired relations between the European Union and London, which hit an all-time low in recent months over Brexit.
And that's it for this week's Talking Europe debate. Thank you once again to all of my guests, Natalie McNellis, Christopher Fjellner and Philippe Lamberts. Thank you all for your time. Thank you very much for watching, and do stay tuned to France 24. Plenty more European news coming up for you.